Hey, what's up YouTube? Reefing ain't easy, and neither is figuring out the probes on your Apex. You know, how do they work, how to calibrate them, that sort of thing. If you're like me, I bought it used and I was confused at the beginning, so I just wanted to explain some of that to you. I'm gonna go over how to calibrate and get accurate readings, when you should calibrate, and then some just basic knowledge that if you're a beginner like me, when you first looked at it, you might have been confused, and these were the questions I was asking. First off is, which probe is which? You know, maybe when you buy it new, it's labeled and stuff, but that is your pH probe. The black probe that is long and has little circles on the side down by the end, that's your salinity probe. The probe that's just, you know, black and has just like a bottom, it doesn't look like the others, that's your temperature probe. And the last probe is the ORP probe. One other thing for the beginners is your Apex says 35 ppt, but all you've ever seen is 1.026. What's going on here? It's just two different ways to measure salinity. ppt stands for parts per thousand. You're basically 35 means 3.5% of your water is salt. That's what it means. 1.026 is specific gravity. Can't remember what that means off the top of my head, but it's just different ways to measure it. You can Google it and you can see a chart. It's going to be based on temperature, but 1.026 is 35 parts per thousand. Maybe even 34 and 36 are, because there's a little bit more of a range there, but just know it's just two different ways to measure it. And I think scientists, and the most accurate way is to actually measure it in ppt, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. Just wanted to clear that up if you're a beginner. All right, now that we got that out of the way, I want to bring up a really important point first, because I'm going to cover it in the video and I'm hopefully going to give you some relief and answer the question. You might be having issues with your salinity probe. That's totally normal and common. Don't worry about it. I'm going to go over a bunch of issues that happens. One is you're trying to calibrate it, that's not working. I'm going to go over that. The other is you've got it calibrated, but it's giving you wonky, crazy readings and going all over the place and you don't know what's going on. And I understand, it's like, man, pay all this money for an Apex, you would think that it'd be really good, and I'm here to tell you a few things. One is, it actually really is extremely accurate, and it is a really good probe, and it is beneficial. The part that gets frustrating is not fully understanding how to use it. So first, I'm going to cover the easiest probes, and lastly, I'm going to go over the salinity probe. You can skip ahead to the end of the video that goes over the salinity if that's the only reason you're here for. But let's first talk about the ORP probe. How often do you calibrate and how do you calibrate it? Answer is simple. The ORP probe, you don't ever need to calibrate it. It's calibrated out of the box. It's good, ready to go. Don't ever mess with it. And in all honesty, most reefers aren't really going to use the ORP probe for much. Maybe if you're running some ozone, which I don't think most reefers are. And ORP, you know, it's nice to know, hey, it's supposed to be between these measurements, but realistically, I don't even pay attention to it or worry about it that much. Sometimes it is fun to see, oh, when I, dose this or do that, it affects my ORP. But as long as it's in that range, you're good. What ORP might be good for is you're having something go wrong with your tank and you notice, hey, this started happening yesterday and it's just been going downhill. Maybe check out your ORP. Was there a point where something changed in the ORP and it's headed in the wrong direction? It can give you some information where it's like, yes, something is definitely going on in my tank, and it might be helpful to diagnose and figure out what's going on and what's wrong. But for the most part, like me, I've never really used the ORP. I check to make sure, hey, I'm in range. I notice when I change things on my tank, maybe I'm running in the 400s, now I'm running in the 200s, and that's a whole nother video. But for the most part, you don't really need to worry about ORP too much. It's just a tool to help you diagnose problems if you have them. And we all know reefing ain't easy, so you probably will. A point I want to make with the three probes that you can calibrate is, don't calibrate unless you need to. So when it comes time and you're wondering, should I calibrate, check them. After you check them, if they need calibrate, calibrate. If they don't need calibrate, do not calibrate. In my opinion, it's a waste of time and you're more likely to throw something off and make a mistake. Why take the time? Everything's in line. Obviously, what has been happening has been working. Don't do anything to change it. Now you're gonna take it out of the water, move it. Maybe you put it in a different way or something. It's like, leave it alone. It's working great. Don't calibrate. Let's go to the next probe, the temperature probe. How often should you calibrate it? It's really up to you. If I had to give a recommendation to be safe and for liability reasons, I would say every month. But I've never actually calibrated my temperature probe, and luckily for me, it's been on. It hasn't really changed. I might be one of the lucky ones. The way that you would calibrate it is you have to get a thermometer that you trust and know to be true. So you want one that you think is more accurate than the apex, you know? So I actually use a cheap little thermometer, this one right here, that's like for cooking meat and stuff. So I would actually trust the apex over this one just because of price and stuff. But ironically, luckily for me, they actually both give me the exact same reading. So if you want to calibrate your probe or you want to check it, I would just take a thermometer you trust, check them out, see if they're giving you the same reading, or maybe they're off by a half a degree. Wait a month, test again. They should be off a half a degree still. If it's changed, what you want to do is make sure that it's the apex that changed and not your thermometer. So if it's a cheap thermometer like the one I have, I would suspect that that's the one that's changed more than the apex. And you probably want to get 2 or 3 and test them out. You know, I have this little mercury one I can test it against and see what's going on. Or you can invest in a really nice thermometer that you know is going to be accurate and good, and then test the apex to that. And if the apex is off, go ahead and calibrate. All right, so the pH probe. Now, pH in a normal reef tank, you know, I don't know, 7.6 or 8, all the way up to like 8.4. Most people are going to be running in that range. And what you really want to use the probe for, if you're not doing something like running a calcium reactor or raising your pH to that higher limit where you're trying to get faster growth with whatever method, you don't really need to calibrate that often. And I would say like every 6 months, just check it. So the way you're going to check it is you're going to use one of these solutions where it tells you, hey, at this temperature, you're going to get a reading pH of 7 on your pH. I recommend using the 7. If you don't have one, you can go ahead and use a 10 or a 4, but I would recommend using the 7 when you're checking it if that's possible. Now, a couple things. It isn't instant. So when you put it in there and you look, oh, wait, it hasn't changed, it takes a little bit of time. Give it, you know, I would say at least 5 minutes. Let it sit there. You'll notice it slowly changes and will creep into the 7. So make sure you give it some time. I'll show you another quick trick. On your apex, especially if you're not hardwired, you're going over Wi-Fi, you're gonna go to your settings, you're gonna go to your IP address of your apex, you're gonna go to that, you're gonna type that into your URL, log in, and that'll show you results a lot quicker. As shown here, there's a little bit of a lag when you're viewing it through, you know, your phone or just the internet, and it'll just be quicker, so you'll see it'll change a lot quicker. I would recommend that. Again, give it 5 minutes, and if it reads 7, great. Let's say it reads a little bit off of 7. If you need it to be dialed in and perfect, then go ahead and calibrate. But if you don't need perfect accuracy, maybe don't waste the time. Just take note of that. Then once it drifts far enough to where it could create an issue, then I would go ahead and calibrate. But for me, I've only had my apex for 11 months. I got it used, calibrated it once. It's been dead on. I've only tested it twice. I just did it today because I was making this video and it was dead on. It's supposed to be 7. It read exactly 7, which is awesome. Bravo to apex. That's a really good probe. It hasn't drifted or changed. I'm really impressed with it, really like it. I know results may vary. Now, you know, where my probe is, the way the water's hitting it, how close the heaters are, electrical stuff, all the different variables. In my tank, it happens to work out really well. There might be something going on in your tank where it causes it to drift over time. I have heard that the pH probe is more likely to drift or not be accurate in a shorter amount of time than the Salinity Probe on average, but every tank is different, so just know your tank. But the point is, check it. If it doesn't need to be calibrated, don't waste the time doing it. Reefing already ain't easy enough, don't make it harder than it needs to be. Okay, so let's get into the Salinity Probe, which I know a lot of you guys are here for. So first things first, let me show you something on my apex real quick. See how the temperature and the salinity are correlating? They literally change together. That shows you how amazing and good this probe is. This actually is a really good probe because the little bit of difference in temperature is going to affect the conductivity of your probe. And all this probe is doing is measuring how much conductivity there is between two little pieces of metal, how easily the electricity can transfer back and forth between those. So it shows you it's a very accurate, very good probe. Now there are 3 main issues. One is it's an electrical probe, so it can suffer from electrical interference. And if you got like a sump, you know, you've got all these electrical things, all these wires, it's like, yeah, you should expect it to be pretty common that you're gonna have some electrical interference. So there's a couple things you can do. One is, if you don't have electrical interference, don't even mess with it, leave it alone, you're good. But you might notice that the readings like kind of get a little wonky. You might even be able to correlate it if you have your skimmer that, you know, turns off and on throughout the day or something like that. Oh, that's what's causing the change. Look for that. Now, one thing is move your probe around, and sometimes you just gotta mess with it until you find an area that doesn't happen. Another big thing, the wire that goes from the apex to your probe, you're probably running them all together. That's actually what I do with mine, and I don't have an issue. Not all of the wires, but a lot of them. You know, fingers crossed, I'm very lucky and blessed. But if you have them running with a bunch of wires, separate it so that it's running by itself and see if that helps. That's just the nature of the beast. It's an electrical probe, which is actually a lot more accurate than a refractometer, believe it or not. But the downside is you can run into electrical interference, and it just so happens in a tank you've got tons of electrical stuff going on. So maybe you have like a whole fish room, or you're not cramming everything underneath your tank. If you have the ability to keep it separate away from electrical components and on its own, you're gonna have the best results that way. But you might not even have that issue like mine. It's crammed up underneath there, the wire runs with the other wires, never had that issue. Now another issue is air can get up underneath there. They do have these little ports on the side for air to escape, but really we're talking about nano, micro bubbles, things that are super small, and they kind of like stick to those little electrodes that are in there. And that is a really common issue, and we'll talk about with calibrating, that happens a lot too. So that is something else that can happen. So you need to put your probe somewhere where there's not a lot of turbulence, not next to your skimmer where you're getting a bubble buildup, somewhere where that isn't happening. And it's really hard to tell. You might think, oh, I don't have the bubble issue, but you actually do. It's like almost literally impossible to see them. So move your probe around and find an area where it's very low turbulence where that doesn't happen. Those are the most common things. Now the third most common thing that is really, really hard is calibrating your probe. There's a lot of things that make it very difficult. One is, like I was mentioning, those air bubbles. You're removing it, fills up with air, then you put it back into solution, air goes in there. Another thing that makes it really hard to calibrate is that probe is supposed to dry. And you pull it out of the water, you can kind of wipe it off with a paper towel, but the components up in there, like how long does that take to dry? You're gonna have to sit there and wait forever. Some people recommend 24 hours. That's a big reason why it's really hard to calibrate in some situations. Maybe you get lucky and it works. I've only tried to calibrate it one time and it didn't work. It read 5 parts per thousand, higher than what I know the tank water was to be. So it's a very common thing. Don't sweat it, don't worry about it. So I'm gonna propose 3 possible solutions. One solution is take the time to really calibrate it right. So first thing you can do is pull it out of your tank, let it completely dry. I would recommend even dipping it in RO water, swishing it around, pulling it out of the RO water, and then leaving it and let it completely dry. Give it 24 hours. The reason I'm saying dip it in the RO water is give it a little bit of a rinse, because as it dries, the salt is going to precipitate out of the solution. It's going to dry up and create a little salt creep on there, which can create calibration issues. And when you put it in there, now you've added extra salt to your solution, that sort of thing. So give it a quick rinse in the RO water, pull it out, let it dry for 24 hours. That's why it's a pain in the butt, and this is actually the solution that I would recommend least. But I know there's some people out there, they want to get it done and get it done right. It's a bit overkill. You probably don't need to let it dry that long. All right, the next step is you're going to put your solution unopened, whatever you're going to be testing it in. Get it as warm as your water. Easy is just drop it in your tank, let it float around, get up to water temperature. Now you're going to go to the apex, go to the task function, calibrate Salinity Probe, click there. First thing it's going to say, make sure you're picking the right probe, and then you press run, and it's going to take a baseline while it's dry. Take a second, after that's good, press next. Now it's going to tell you to put it in the solution. So you want to cut the corner off of this solution, and you want it to be just big enough to fit the probe in there. Maybe start with a small one, see if it fits, doesn't. You want it to be just big enough to where you can fit the probe in there. Now, what happens is you put the probe in, and obviously, there's air in there, it creates an air pocket. It's supposed to escape through those holes, but it doesn't always work right. So you want to kind of tilt it so the hole is up and move it around a little bit. These are very fragile, so don't be banging it up against stuff, but give it a couple taps, move it around. Another thing you can do is trying to get all this air out of this packet, right? And this is why you cut it just to be there, is you kind of almost turn it upside down. The issue is if you have air in the packet, now you're going to have it just submerged in air again. So I almost try to put it in the middle of the packet so that the probe is like, rather than having the probe right up against there, I'm going to put it in, I'm going to turn it, I'm going to give it a couple shakes, right? My finger is the probe. Then without getting it all the way to there, just kind of quickly, I kind of give it a couple like that. And I don't pull it all the way to here because there's probably going to be a little air pocket there, but I try to make sure it's completely submerged. That's the idea. And so you can flip it up so all that air comes out. So give it a little shake, flip it, and then I do that, and then I shake it again, and I just hope that there's no air bubbles in there, because if there is an air bubble in there, you know, it'll eventually probably work itself out over the next few hours, but it's going to calibrate it in the next like couple of minutes. So that's a big reason why the calibration doesn't work, and you almost just have to get lucky, in my opinion. But there's plenty of people that have done it and had a good time. Like I said, I've only tried it once, so I don't know how often it happens. I just did skip to the other two solutions because they're easier. But then you just let it sit in the salinity packet, and then it should be calibrated. Now you go through all those steps and you look at your apex and you just get furious, because now it says it's 30 or 40 parts per million, and you know for 100% fact, because you've checked it with other refractometers that you know are calibrated correctly and that you've done everything right, and you're just, I mean, you're 100% sure it's definitely not what it's reading, then it can be pretty frustrating. But here's the thing. As long as you don't have it in a spot that's getting micro bubbles or electrical interference, whatever the reading is, it's going to be stable and it's going to stay right there as long as your salinity isn't changing. Here's one of the solutions, and what I did for a long time is I don't really care if it says 40 or 32 or 45. I just know, hey, 35 parts per thousand is my 40 on the apex, and that's all I need to know. And really what it's used for and what it's very, very good at, because you can see how it fluctuates even with just the minute little bit of temperature changes, is it tells you if something goes off. So you can set alarms based on that 40 or whatever it is, and just watch it. You know, whenever you look at your apex, hey, yep, it's around 40. If you start all of a sudden one day you look at it and it's at 45, it's like, oh wait, is something wrong? So check your ATO. All of a sudden, yeah, your ATO doesn't have any water in it, things are evaporating, your salinity is getting high, your apex just helps you do that. Better yet, put an alarm on so if it gets out of whack, you're known right away. Maybe your salinity starts creeping up because you're 2-part dosing and over time you're adding more salts to the tank, that sort of thing. So that's another solution, is who really cares if it doesn't say 35? Really what you're using this probe for is to know if your salinity goes up or down from where it should be. That's the other solution. Now the third solution is a little bit of a hybrid that I think will help for the people that want it to be accurate but also are struggling with the calibration. That solution is you need to absolutely 100% positively make sure your tank is dead on 35 parts per thousand. Okay, so after you've used, you know, high quality, you know, I got this guy here, I've calibrated it, I've got this guy here, I use Calibration Solution, I calibrated it, I'm getting the exact same readings in this. Maybe you even take a little bit of your water, take it to your local fish store, say, hey, can you tell me what the salinity of this is? I'm having some issues with my refractometer or whatever you're using. And they confirm, hey, we're definitely good. You're 100% without a doubt positive tank water is 35 parts per million. That's the key there, because trust me on this, your apex is more accurate than, you know, some kind of refractometer. So don't just be like, oh, well, this says 35 parts per million, but that says 37, so that must be off. No, it's way more likely that this is off, okay? Just know that. So once you're fine on that, here's the trick. You're gonna calibrate with your tank water. It's that easy, and you can do that, and it is recommended. So you have to do the first step, and honestly, I did this, and I let it dry for like 5 minutes. I pulled it out of the tank, wiped it off with a paper towel, sat it down, let it dry for 5 minutes, hit calibrate, got a reading dry, put it in my tank. Now, when you put it in your tank, if you have the option to tilt it on its side, shake it a little bit, try to get those bubbles out. I know a lot of them are holders where you're putting it in a circle, so you can't just like flip it upside down to get all those air bubbles out. But a lot of times there's a screw, put it in there, it gives you some wiggle room, move it around, be gentle, don't like hit it hard, but try to get those bubbles out, screw it in, and then let it calibrate to your tank water, and there you go. Now it's reading 35 parts per thousand, and you're good to go. That is a good way to calibrate. Now, if you're gonna do that method, first put it in your tank and make sure it's stable. You know, give it 3-4 days, and whatever it's reading, as long as it's staying stable, you know, it might fluctuate a little bit, but it's not jumping like 5 parts per thousand. If it's jumping around, that means you're getting air bubbles or you have electrical interference. But if it's staying stable, then you can do that method of using your tank water to calibrate. The key there is getting your tank water to 35 parts per thousand and being 100% sure, so you need other instruments to be able to measure it and make sure it's good. Now you'll notice on these packets, it'll say 53,000, not even gonna attempt. Now, that just means it's 35 parts per thousand. Now, there is one catch with these types of calibration things for your electrical probe. They don't work in refractometers, so don't make that mistake. Electrical probe calibration solution will not work in a refractometer. I know that you might be like, oh, well, I'll use this as a known solution. I'll test it in my refractometer, and then I know if that's on, then my tank's on. Just don't make that mistake. All right, guys, so I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. If you thought this video was helpful, please let me and YouTube know by liking, commenting, subscribing, or doing all three. What that'll do is say, hey, this is a good video, so if other people are searching for this information, YouTube will be like, hey, some people like this one. Is this good content for you? Because I know this isn't talked about much, and I really just wanted to get that point across. I'm sure you buy this really expensive Apex and then you're having all these issues with the Salinity Probe and you're just like, want to pull your hair out. Like I said, reefing ain't easy, but hopefully this gave you some relief. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.